Hey, if you found this channel tonight, if this video somehow landed in your feed at exactly this moment, I need you to know something before this story even starts. I see you. I see the woman who has been holding absolutely everything together while quietly, privately, falling apart on the inside. The woman who pours herself into a life, a marriage, a family, a partnership, gives all of it, the best of herself, the sharpest and most creative parts of herself, and then one day looks up and realizes that somewhere in all that pouring, she forgot to save any for herself. The woman who is too smart to be fooled and too loving to say it out loud yet. The woman who keeps going because she has always been the one who keeps going, and she has forgotten that was a choice, not a biological fact. If that is you, sit with me tonight. Get comfortable. Get your tea, or your wine, or your coffee, or just your quiet, and let me tell you what happened when one woman finally decided that silence was not the same as surrender. That invisible was not the same as powerless. That bending was not the same as broken. This is her untold revenge. And this story? This one is going to stay with you for a long time. My name is Celeste Aurore Thibodeau, and I was born into a family that believed deeply, generationally, with great love and absolutely zero irony, that a woman's greatest accomplishment was standing gracefully and beautifully behind the right man. I grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana, where the Spanish moss hung thick and silver off the live oaks and the summers were so humid it felt like breathing through a warm, wet cloth. Where the food was extraordinary and the music was always somewhere nearby, and the family went 17 layers deep in every direction, and everybody knew everybody's business, and everybody had an opinion about what you were supposed to do with your life. I grew up Cajun, old blood, rooted deep in Acadiana, and with that heritage came beauty and warmth. A whole invisible architecture of unspoken rules that governed what a woman was and what a woman was not. Men led, women supported, full stop. You cooked, you kept the home, you raised the children. You showed up at every family gathering with something you had made from scratch, and you looked put together doing it. You managed the household finances without being seen to manage the household finances, because that was too aggressive. You were allowed to be intelligent. My grandmother, Mamère Odette Thibodeau née Broussard, was one of the sharpest people I have ever known in my entire life, but intelligence was meant to serve the family unit, not feed your own individual ambition. Ambition in a woman, in our family, was considered a kind of social bad taste, like wearing too much perfume to church, like speaking too loudly in a restaurant. You just didn't. Not if you had any sense of what was appropriate, and everyone in our family had a very refined sense of what was appropriate. Mamère Odette used to say that the women in our family were like the cypress trees in the bayou. We bent in the wind, but we never broke. She meant it as the highest possible compliment, as a statement of strength, of endurance, of a particular kind of grace under pressure. I believed her. I believed her completely and wholeheartedly for a very long time, and I am only beginning, now, to understand what she was actually describing. But that is a story for the end of this one. My mother, Marguerite Thibodeau, née Fontenade, was the perfect expression of this tradition in every way that mattered. She was, without exaggeration, one of the most quietly capable human beings I have ever witnessed up close. She could run a household of 7 people on a budget that would make most professional accountants weep with respect, could cook a roux to absolute dark chocolate perfection, while simultaneously helping with 2 different sets of homework and talking someone through a bad day on the phone. And also, incidentally, doing the mental math on what they needed from the store. She navigated my father's moods the way a master sailor navigates weather, reading the pressure shifts before they arrived, adjusting the sails, moving people out of the way, making everything look calm while doing enormous invisible work. She was extraordinary. She was magnificent. She was completely, utterly invisible. And she thought that was simply the correct shape of a life. I watched her for 18 years. I told myself I would be different. And then, because life has a particular sense of humor that is not always funny, and because we tend to replicate what we were raised inside, even when we intend with everything we have not to, I wasn't. Not at first. Not for the first 7 years of my marriage, which is the part of this story I am going to tell you tonight. I went to LSU on a partial academic scholarship, which was already a mild act of rebellion in our family, not outright rebellion. No. Thing that dramatic, but a statement of direction. I majored in supply chain management and logistics, which I know does not sound like the most glamorous field in the world, but oh, I was good at it. I was immediately, instinctively, bone-deep good at it in a way that I had never been good at anything else before. numbers and systems, and the invisible machinery that makes commerce move the way things flow from origin to destination, the way you find inefficiencies that nobody else sees, the way you design a process that runs so smoothly it looks like it isn't even happening. That was my language. I thought in it natively. My professors noticed by the second semester of my freshman year. And they kept noticing. And by the time I graduated, I was in the top 4% of my class, and I had a job offer from a Houston-based supply chain firm before I had even walked across the stage. I was 22 years old, and I was about to start a life that was mine. That had my name on it, At was going to go in the direction I pointed it. And then I met Desmond Okafor at a crawfish boil on a Saturday afternoon in April, the spring of my senior year, and I redirected. Desmond was Lord. Was he handsome? That is the only way to begin. 6'2", built like someone had drawn a man from memory and remembered all the best parts, with a laugh that arrived before the rest of him and a smile that stayed in the room after he'd left. He was from Houston originally, had come down to Lafayette for a meeting that was connected to something he was building, a commercial refrigeration and cold chain logistics company in the early stages, just barely off the ground, called Ice Vault Solutions, which, can I just tell you, for a woman who lived and breathed supply chain, who thought in systems and logistics and the invisible infrastructure of how things move from cold storage to consumer, was like meeting someone who spoke your exact private dialect in a country where nobody else did. ID. The specific, rare, particular language of your brain coming out of someone else's mouth. It is a very disorienting and wonderful thing. We talked for 4 hours at that crawfish boil. Just the two of us at one end of a long table, peeling shrimp and forgetting to eat them. The sounds of 40 other people celebrating around us completely irrelevant. He talked about Ice Vault with a passion that was infectious. He had the vision, he had the relationships, he had the ambition, and he asked me questions about logistics and systems design that nobody in my personal life had ever asked me before, because nobody in my personal life had ever cared to. He listened to my answers. He followed up. He pushed back on one point in a way that made me sharper in my response, and then he nodded with something that looked very much like genuine respect, and I felt something catch in my chest. By midnight, when my friends were pulling me toward the car, I was already gone. We dated for 14 months. NTHS. He proposed on the front porch of Mimir Odette's house in Lafayette on a September evening when the sky was the color of a bruised violet and the fireflies were just coming up from the grass, and the smell of her Confederate jasmine was almost unbearably sweet in the warm air. He got down on one knee on the old painted boards of that porch, and he said things that I believed, that I felt in my whole body, that I thought were the truest things anyone had ever said to me. I said yes before he finished the sentence. He hadn't even gotten to the question yet. We married the following April, in a church that had been in Lafayette since 1847, white walls and dark wood pews and light coming through old imperfect glass in that particular way that makes everything look slightly sacred. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings, small, perfect, warm from her skin, and I carried gardenias because they smelled like the South in the best possible way, and I thought I genuinely, completely wholeheartedly believed that I had done something different from what I had grown up inside, that this was the real partnership, the one where we build something together, the one where we are both fully visible. We moved to Houston. I deferred my job offer, which I told myself was temporary, because Desmond needed operational help getting Ice Vault off the ground, and I was the right person for it, literally, professionally, structurally the right person, and I thought, this is just smart allocation of talent. This is us building something together. He handles client relationships and investor conversations and the vision, because that is his gift, and I handle operations and systems and logistics infrastructure, because that is mine, and together we make something that neither of us could make alone. And in a few years, once the company is established, we figure out what my formal role looks like, and we put my name on it properly. That is what I thought. What actually happened was something quieter and more corrosive than any dramatic betrayal I could have predicted. I became the invisible engine of Ice Vault Solutions. I designed the routing systems that cut delivery time by 31% in the first year. I built supplier relationships, drove to meetings, had dinners, made phone calls at 7 in the morning that became the backbone of Ice Vault's supply network. I drafted the operational frameworks for every major contract, not the legal language. I always passed that to outside counsel, but the terms and the logic and the structure, the part that actually requires someone to understand the industry. I developed the proprietary real-time temperature monitoring protocol that became IceVault's signature selling point, the thing that clients cited in every testimonial, the thing that Desmond presented at conferences as the company's core technological advantage. I trained the first 6 operations staff we hired. I troubleshot every system's failure in the first 3 years, usually at strange hours, usually while Desmond was traveling for a meeting that I had also prepared the materials for. I did all of this while keeping our home the way I had been taught to keep a home. While hosting client dinners for 12, 15, 20 people, cooking things I had made from scratch because that was the image that worked the founder's wife, who makes her grandmother's recipes. While managing Desmond's mother when she came to stay for weeks at a time. While attending every industry event on his arm and talking to the right people and being warm and smart and appropriate and completely, fully invisible as a contributor. And through all of this, all 7 years of it, my name did not appear on a single official document at IceVault Solutions. Not on the founding papers, not on the operating agreement, not on a contract, not on a single public-facing document, not anywhere. Because at the beginning, early on, when I had first raised the question, number of formalizing my role, Desmond had said gently, reasonably, in that way he had of saying unreasonable things with a reasonable voice, baby, it's just cleaner for the clients to have one clear point of contact. You know how these old-school industry guys operate. They want to know who they're calling, who's responsible. We don't want to confuse the narrative of the company. And I, because I had been Mimir Odette's cypress tree my entire life, because I had been trained from birth to read the room and understand what was being asked of me, and fold myself into the available shape, I said okay. I said okay, and then I never raised it again, and the years went by, and IceVault grew. In year 3, we hit $1 million in annual revenue. In year 5, we had 28 employees and contracts across 3 states. In year 7, IceVault Solutions had 43 employees, was active in 4 states, and Desmond was presenting at regional industry conferences and being quoted in traditional publications and being considered for a board position at the Southwest Logistics Association, and at the conference dinner where they announced his nomination, he gave a speech about the vision and the grind and the people who had believed in IceVault from the beginning, and I sat at table 4 in a blue dress I had bought specifically for this event, and I applauded with everyone else, and I smiled, and I thought, I made half of this, more than half, and there is not a single word about me in that speech. Not a single word. I am not going to lie to you and tell you I didn't know that. I knew it. I had been knowing it for years. But there is a difference between knowing something and being able to name it out loud, even to yourself. And for a very long time, I kept the knowledge in a room I didn't go into very often. I had built this marriage, this life, this partnership. I needed it to be what I believed it was. The alternative was too large to look at directly. And then, in the spring, of our 7th year of marriage, a Tuesday morning in April, I found out about Paige Arsenault. Not dramatically, not with a scene. It was an email notification. 9 words in a preview on a laptop screen that had been left open on the kitchen counter while Desmond was out for a run. 9 words in a subject line from a sender whose name I did not know yet, but whose tone warm, familiar, private told me everything immediately. 9 words that a woman should not have to read about her husband, that reconfigured everything I was looking at in about 3 seconds, the way those optical illusions do, and once you see it differently, you cannot unsee it. I stood on the cold tile floor of my kitchen in Houston, Texas, in my socks, with the coffee maker still running behind me, and I read those 9 words. And then I very carefully, very deliberately, closed the laptop, and I poured my coffee, and I sat down at the table. I sat there for 45 minutes, not crying, not moving really, just processing, feeling the information move through my system the way cold water moves through your body when you drink it too fast on a summer day. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbors' sprinklers came on at their scheduled time and then went off again. A bird flew into the window on the far side of the house with that particular hollow thump and then flew away. The coffee in my mug went from hot to warm. I want you to sit in that 45 minutes with me for a moment, because I think it matters. I think there is an assumption, maybe a cultural one, maybe just a narrative one, that when you discover something like this, you explode. You cry, you scream, you throw things, you call your mother, you confront him at the door when he comes back from his run. Some women do those things. I am not judging any of them. I understand every single impulse. But I had spent 7 years learning to absorb, to process quietly, to take an enormous amount of information and convert it from something hot and immediate into something I could work with. My family had been training me for this moment my entire life, as it turned out just not in the way they intended. When Desmond came back from his run, I was at the kitchen counter reading something on my own phone. I said good morning. I asked if he wanted eggs. He said yes. I made them. I did not fall apart. I felt something cold and slow and very clear move through me, like the moment before a big decision, when everything gets very quiet and very sharp, and I thought, with a calm that I know sounds strange, but I can only describe as genuine. Okay, now I know. Now I know exactly what I am working with. Now I know what the actual situation is. And I began to plan. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you understood about your life suddenly reorganized into a completely different picture, and the picture was nothing like what you thought you had been building? Where all the data was the same, all the facts were the same, but the meaning of it all had shifted completely? I think some of you know that feeling. It is its own particular kind of grief, that moment, not the dramatic grief, but the quiet, devastating grief of understanding that you have been keeping a promise alone. Drop a comment if you know what I am talking about, because I think a lot of us have been in that kitchen, figuratively, standing on a cold floor, holding a coffee that is getting cold. I spent 3 weeks in a state of what I can only call surgical calm. Not numb, I want to be clear about that, because numb implies not feeling, and I felt everything. I felt all of it. I felt the betrayal and the humiliation and the grief and the specific particular rage of a woman who has been giving her best work to someone who is spending his private time somewhere else. I felt every single bit of it. I just felt it privately, quietly, underneath the normal surface of my days, like lava under very still water. And during those 3 weeks, while feeling all of that privately, I did 4 specific, deliberate, strategic things. The first thing, I began documenting my contributions to IceVault solutions. Not by going through anyone else's records, I had my own. I had always kept meticulous records, because that is who I am, because I am constitutionally incapable of not keeping organized records. It is practically a character flaw. I had copies of every system I had built, every protocol I had written, every training document, every supplier communication framework, every routing algorithm, every operational manual. 4 years of it, organized by project and date and version. I organized all of it now with a different intention. I was not building a company archive. I was building a case file. The second thing, I called my cousin Bernadette Fontenot, who is a family law attorney in Baton Rouge, and who I knew would tell me the truth, even when the truth was complicated. We had a long, careful conversation. The kind where you say everything you need to say without saying the actual words, because the walls have ears, and also because once you say the actual words, things move, and you need to be ready for them to move. Bernadette understood perfectly. She walked me through what I was entitled to as a spouse, and this is the part that mattered most as an unrecognized contributor to a business. She explained the difference between Texas law and Louisiana law on these matters. She connected me with a Houston-based business attorney named Yolanda Marsh, who she trusted completely. She said, "Celeste, I need you to understand that what you have is much stronger than you know." And I said, "I know. I'm starting to know that." The third thing, I enrolled in a graduate certificate program in entrepreneurship and business development at Rice University. Online, nights, after Desmond was asleep. I told him I was doing continuing education coursework for professional development. He looked at me. Over his phone, said, "That's great, babe," and went back to whatever he was reading. He did not ask a single follow-up question. The fourth thing I did was call Simone. Simone was 16 at the time, the daughter of my younger sister Clementine, my niece, the one who called me Tante Celeste and who had been calling me that since she was 2 years old and couldn't quite get the full word. She was the kind of girl who made you feel immediately like the room was a better place for having her in it, not because she was performing anything, but because she was genuinely, almost uncomfortably alive in a way that some people are at 16 before the world starts working on them. She had her mother's dark eyes and my grandmother's stubbornness and a laugh that was completely unpredictable and always felt like a gift. I loved her with a fierceness I could not fully articulate, the way you love someone who reminds you of who you were before you started making compromises. I called her that. First week, not because I was going to tell her anything I wasn't. She was 16. She didn't need the weight of it, but because I needed to hear a voice that was still uncomplicated, still moving forward instead of sideways. She told me she had been selected for a business and entrepreneurship summer program at Tulane. She was so excited she was practically levitating through the phone. She said, "Tant Celeste, I want to build something. Like actually build something from nothing for real, with my name on it, not just work for someone else my whole life, you know?" And I said, "I know exactly what you mean, baby." And I meant it in two directions at once. In the direction of her future, her trajectory, everything she was pointing herself toward, and in the direction of myself, where I was standing, what I was beginning to understand about the shape of the last 7 years. After we hung up, I sat outside on the back patio in the warm Houston darkness, the kind of warmth that doesn't really leave even when the sun goes down, and I let myself cry for 20 minutes. I have told people this and gotten the strangest looks that I set a timer. But grief, I had learned, like every other powerful process, needed a container or it would consume all available space. 20 minutes. And then I wiped my face and went back inside and poured myself a glass of water and sat down at my laptop and started writing the first draft of what would eventually become Acadia Cold Chain Solutions business plan. That was the beginning. I want to be honest with you about the next 14 months because I think the way these stories get told sometimes creates an impression of a woman who was coldly, flawlessly executing a plan, never doubling back, never losing her nerve. That is not how it was. That is never how it is. I stayed in my marriage for 14 more months after that April morning. And I want to be clear about why, because I think it matters. I stayed because I was building something, and I needed time and the appearance of normalcy to build it. Every month I stayed was a month I was attending to 4 things simultaneously: the documentation, the legal groundwork with Yolanda Marsh, the Rice Certificate Program, and the early, quiet work of building Acadia, while also running Ice Vault's operations, because the work still needed to be done, and I was still the person doing it, and because I was not going to burn the house down on the way out the door. I left every system functional. I left every process documented. I trained backup. I did not sabotage. That is not who I am. But I will also tell you what those 14 months felt like from the inside, because that is what you deserve to know. It felt like living behind glass, like watching my own life from a very short distance. It felt like performing a version of myself that was a very good likeness but was not quite me. It felt like sitting at client dinners and talking about the Dallas X, panting and smiling at the right moments while inside I was building spreadsheets in my head, not for Ice Vault, for Acadia. It felt like lying in bed in the dark while Desmond slept and running through my plan, with the kind of mental precision that is really just controlled fear wearing a costume. It felt like calling Yolanda at 6 in the morning because I had thought of something during the night and needed to ask her a question before the day started and my window closed. It felt like the loneliest thing I had ever done in my life. Not even the loneliness of being betrayed, that is its own thing, but the loneliness of building something entirely alone, in secret, with no one to celebrate the small victories with, no one to talk through the obstacles with, no one who knew the whole picture. I had never worked alone before, not really. I had always been half of something, even when that half was invisible. There were nights, I will not pretend otherwise, where I lay in the dark ND felt the self-doubt so loudly that it was almost a sound, where the voice in my head sounded disturbingly like my mother, like Mamire Odette, like the whole chorus of Thibodeau women bending their cypress branches. Who do you think you are, building something of your own? You are the support. You are the background. You have never been the one out in front. What makes you think you know how to do this alone? Those nights were hard. On those nights, I made tea. I sat at the kitchen counter and I drank tea, and I thought about Simone, about the way she had said, "I want to build something with my name on it." And I thought, I am going to have an answer for her. When she is grown and she asks me what it looks like to build something, I am going to have an answer. That kept me going, more than almost anything else. The second time Simone appears in this story, she was 17, and it was Mamire Odette's 81st birthday celebration in Lafayette. The whole family was there: aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, the whole sprawling, gorgeous, loud Thibodeau organism. It was an October Sunday, the kind of afternoon where the air in Louisiana has finally stopped trying to suffocate you and is just warm instead of oppressive, and someone had pecan trees dropping their first leaves in the backyard, and there was a pot of gumbo on the stove that I could smell from the front porch, and someone had a Zydeco playlist going low on a portable speaker in the corner. Desmond had come, we were still married, still performing the outline of the partnership, and he was working the room the way he always did at family gatherings, easy and charming and loud enough to fill space without being loud enough to seem like he was trying to. I watched him for a few minutes, and then I stopped watching him and went to find Simone. She was sitting at the dining room table with my mother and two of my aunts. She had her college brochure out, the Tulane entrepreneurship program she had told me about, and I stood in the doorway for a moment watching the conversation, and I felt something cold move through my chest. My mother was talking. She was talking about how wonderful it was that Simone was so ambitious, and how smart she was, and how that intelligence was such a gift, and then she turned it, the way the current of a river turns without announcement, into a conversation about how those skills would make her such an asset to her future husband's endeavors, how a woman who understood business was the best kind of partner, how the most successful men always had incredibly capable women behind them. My aunt nodded. The other aunt nodded. Mamie Odette, at the head of the table, sat with her coffee and said nothing either way, which in her particular language meant consent. Simone was smiling, the polite closed smile, the one I recognized from the inside, the one that means, I am listening to what you are saying and I am deciding how much of myself to surrender to make this room comfortable. And she looked up, across the table, and she found my eyes in the doorway, and for one unguarded second her face said clearly, in the language women speak to each other across rooms when they cannot say things out loud, "Is this it? Is this what I have to do?" I looked at her directly. I gave her the smallest possible nod, a barely perceptible movement that meant, "Number, not if I have anything to do with it." That night, lying in the guest room of my mother's house while Desmond had already left for Houston with a client call, I no longer had any illusions about. I got out my laptop and I worked until 2 in the morning. I accelerated every timeline. I called Yolanda the next day. I told her I needed to move faster. The third time Simone appeared in this story, the time that actually broke the dam, she was 18. And it was spring. And she called me crying, which she almost never did, because she was her grandmother's granddaughter and we did not cry in front of people without significant cause. She had gotten into Tulane, a real offer, the 5-year BBA program with an entrepreneurship concentration. Full information, competitive financial aid package, the thing she had been working toward for 2 years with the kind of focused intention I recognized and loved in her. And my uncle Remy, Simone's grandfather on her father's side, the patriarch of the branch of the family she lived with after Clementine moved back to Lafayette, had sat her down and told her that Tulane was too expensive, too far, too much, that she should go to the local community college, get a business certificate in 2 years, get herself established locally, find a good man, start a family while she was young. That ambition was good, but there was such a thing as too much ambition in a young woman, and that he only said this because he loved her and wanted what was best for her. Clementine had said nothing. The tradition had said nothing needed to be said. Simone calculated, led me. She called me the way you call the one person you trust to tell you the truth when everyone else is telling you to be smaller. She was trying very hard not to cry, and she wasn't succeeding, and her voice was shaking a little at the edges, and she said, "Tante Celeste, am I being stupid? Is wanting this stupid? Everyone is acting like I am asking for something impossible, like I don't understand what the world is. Am I wrong about what I can do?" I was sitting in my car in a parking garage in Houston. It was 9:15 at night. I had been in meetings for 11 hours. My coffee had been cold for the last 4 of them. I was tired in a way that went all the way to my spine. And I felt something inside me, something that had been moving in a careful, measured, strategic way for over a year, suddenly become something faster, something hotter, something that had run out of patience for being careful. "Simone," I said, and I stopped for a second because I needed to say this exactly right. "Simone, you are not stupid. You are not asking for too much. You are not wrong about what you can do. What I need you to understand right now is that the women in our family have been bending for so long that we forgot we were allowed to stand up straight. Someone along the way taught us that disappearing was the same as being graceful, and it is not. I know what I am talking about. I have been living that lesson for 7 years, and I am not going to let you start learning it at 18. She was quiet, and then she said softly, "Tante Celeste, are you okay?" And I said, "I am going to be okay. I promise you I am going to be okay. And so are you. But right now, I need you to do exactly one thing. I need you to say yes to Tulane. The money, let me handle the money." Another silence. And then, "You don't have to, Simone, let me handle the money." I paid the first year's tuition, housing, and a stipend in full. I did it through the school's financial office, so it was clean and direct. I told Simone it was a loan, and she said, "I'll pay you back," and we both understood that was not the point. The week after I wrote that check, I filed for divorce. I need you to understand that these two events are directly connected, because watching Simone almost get swallowed, watching the tradition reach out its slow, kind, well-intentioned hands and begin to reshape her, I understood with full clarity that every single day I stayed was a day I was demonstrating to her that this was survivable, that you could disappear yourself into someone else's life, and it was fine, it worked out, you ended up okay. I was not willing to demonstrate that to her. I was not willing to be that example. Not anymore. If you have a younger woman watching you right now, a niece, a daughter, a little sister, a cousin, a mentee, I want to ask you something directly. What are you showing her? Not telling her. Showing her. Because they learn from what we do, not what we say. Drop a comment if you thought of someone. I want to know her name, even if it's just a first name. She deserves to be named. I filed for divorce on a Wednesday morning at 9:14 a.m. On the same day, Yolanda filed the paperwork registering Acadia Cold Chain Solutions, LLC, with the state of Texas. On the same day, she submitted a formal claim of intellectual property contribution to IceVault Solutions, supported by 411 pages of documented evidence system designs, protocol drafts, version histories, supplier communications, training manuals, routing algorithms, every single piece of work I had done in 7 years, organized into a document that was so thorough and so precisely dated and sourced that Yolanda had looked at me across her desk when I delivered it and said, "Celeste, you prepared for this for years, didn't you?" And I said, "No, I just never stopped keeping records of my own work." She looks at me for a moment and then said, "That is either the saddest or the most strategic thing I have ever heard." And I said, "It's both." Desmond was in Dallas presenting at a conference when all of this was filed. By the time he came home, there were certified mail notices in the mailbox, and the locks had been changed. The lease was in my name. A detail he had allowed me to manage years ago and had apparently never re-examined, which told me something I had already suspected about how closely he had been paying attention to the logistics of his own life. I was already at a furnished apartment in Midtown that I had rented under my own name 3 weeks prior. I had been methodical about moving my personal documents and a few specific items. Everything else was cleanly left in place. He called 16 times. I answered the 17th. "Celeste." His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before, something unmoored. "What is happening? What is this? What are you doing?" "I think." The paperwork is fairly self-explanatory. "Celeste, we can talk about this. We can sit down and actually talk. Whatever you think is happening, whatever you found, we'll communicate through our attorneys going forward." I paused for exactly 1 beat. "Give Paige my regards." And then I ended the call. I sat in my furnished apartment on a couch that smelled like someone else's laundry detergent, with a gas station coffee going cold beside me, and I felt I want to tell you this honestly, because I think it matters, not triumph. Not even relief, exactly. Not yet. What I felt was a vast, clean, enormous stillness. The way the air is after a storm is moved through, washed, clarified, the world in sharper resolution than before. I sat in that stillness for a long time, and then I opened my laptop and went to work. The legal process was 14 months. I will not dress it up. It was not quick, and it was not painless, and it had the specific misery of all divorce proceedings. Is that you are required to quantify and argue about things that you originally made in love, and that process is degrading in a way that no amount of preparation fully protects you from. Desmond had good lawyers. He fought the intellectual property claim, hard argued that I had been a general homemaker and informal advisor, that my contributions were personal, not professional, not documented in any legally meaningful way, that the work was collaborative and organic and impossible to attribute to any one person. I am sure his lawyers believed they were making a reasonable argument. Those 411 pages made a different argument. The settlement took 14 months to finalize. The IP claim resulted in a licensing agreement under which Acadia Cold Chain Solutions obtained full rights to use, develop, and commercialize the temperature monitoring protocol. I had designed the protocol that had been IceVault's signature selling point for 5 years, the protocol that Desm On had presented at conferences as the company's proprietary technology, the protocol that had been mine, that had always been mine, that I had designed in our house in Houston on nights when Desmond was traveling, and that I had kept improving, quietly, for every year that it was running under someone else's name. I also received a financial settlement, the specifics of which I will not discuss publicly. What I will say is that it was appropriate, and that Yolanda Marsh is worth every single cent of her rates. Building Acadia during those 14 months of legal process, I want to tell you what that was actually like, because I think it matters for you to hear it. Not the cleaned-up version, the real version. It was 16-hour days. It was eating breakfast at my desk and forgetting lunch. It was a pitch meeting with an investor that went for 90 minutes and ended with "we'll think about it," and then nothing, and then another one that ended the same way, and a third that was or definitive in its rejection, and then a fourth, a woman named Corinne Watkins, who ran a regional impact fund and who asked me questions for 2 hours about the protocol and the market and my operational background. And at the end said, "Celeste, I am going to be very direct with you. I have been waiting for someone with your specific knowledge to walk through my door for 3 years. We are in." And I kept my face completely professional and went home and cried from sheer relief in the shower because I had not had a moment to let myself do that in weeks. It was me learning, in real time, everything I didn't already know. The investor relationships, the brand, the marketing language, the speaking in public about yourself, part of building a company that is genuinely hard for people who have spent years being excellent behind the scenes. In Icevault's world, I had always been backstage. Now I was out in front. And the light was bright and sometimes disorienting, and there were moments. At 2 in the morning where the self-doubt was so loud I had to get up and make tea just to give my hands something to do. But I had built something before. I knew I had, and I knew how. And this time it had my name on it. Acadia Cold Chain Solutions launched officially 18 months after I filed for divorce. 7 clients in month 1, 11 in month 2. By the end of our first full year, 32 active contracts across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas, with 2 more states in late-stage negotiation. The divorce was finalized in month 23. I kept my name, obviously. Desmond remarried 8 months later. I hope she is reading the operating documents carefully. And now I need to tell you about the Southwest Regional Cold Chain Summit. The Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center in San Antonio in October is a beautiful, enormous space, all glass and high ceilings, and that particular low roar of several thousand conversations at once that you get at any industry event. The Summit is the largest gathering in our space in the Southwest executives, operations directors, investors, suppliers, the entire ecosystem. Icevault had been a presenting sponsor for 4 consecutive years. Their booth was positioned near the main entrance with the largest banner in the building, their logo on the conference tote bags, their name on the program cover. Acadia had a booth for the first time. Row D, toward the back of the hall, between a smaller Texas-based carrier and a Mississippi refrigeration parts supplier. My team, 6 people I had hired and trained and believed in with the full weight of everything I had had, stayed until past midnight the night before to set it up. I had walked through with them at 11 p.m., and everything was right, and I had told them so, and I had meant every word of it. I arrived at 7:15 the next morning, before the floor opened. While caterers were still arranging the breakfast service and audio technicians ran sound checks in the main hall. I was wearing a cream silk blouse and slate gray wide-leg trousers and my grandmother's pearl earrings, the same ones I had worn at my wedding, warm against my skin, always warm, and I had a coffee from the cafe across the street because I had learned not to apologize for wanting the good coffee. I walked the floor, slowly, deliberately, while it was still empty and quiet except for the setting-up sounds. I went to Icevault's booth first. I stood in front of it for a long moment, hands around my coffee cup, and I looked at it carefully. The color scheme, the layout, the talking points on the display panels. I recognized the operational language in the copy. I had written some of that language 3 years ago, at our kitchen table in Houston, late at night, while Desmond was asleep. I looked at it for a long, quiet moment. And then I walked to my own booth. My team arrived at 7:45. We did a walkthrough. I told them they had built something excellent. I meant it. We were ready. The floor opened at 9. By 10 o'clock, I had had 4 good conversations, including one with the operations director of a grocery distribution company out of Phoenix named Gerald Farnsworth, who had specifically flown in to learn more about Acadia's protocol after seeing our Q3 case study in a trade publication. He was the kind of person who asked detailed, technically sophisticated questions, and I answered every one of them with the same ease I had always felt when talking about this work, because this was my native language, and I had never been more fluent in it than right now. We were 20 minutes into that conversation. I was walking Gerald through the real-time deviation alert system, the specific threshold logic that made our response time dramatically faster than industry standard, when I became aware, through that particular peripheral awareness that I think women develop when they have spent years monitoring a room for shifts in emotional weather. Desmond was approximately 30 feet away. He was moving through the floor the way he moved through every room, easy, confident, working his way through conversations with that smile, and then he looked up. And he saw me. I want to be precise about what I observed happen to his face in that moment, because I have replayed it carefully, and I think each phase matters. First, recognition. The face you make when you see something your brain expected to see. Then, a fraction of a second of recalibration. His eyes moved from my face to the space around me, the booth, the banner behind me with Acadia's name and logo, the professional context of what I was standing inside, and his brain worked on that information. You could see it working. You could see the moment the recalibration failed to produce a comfortable resolution. Then, something harder to name. Not quite shock, he was too controlled for shock. Not quite anger, that would have been easier to read. Something more in the territory. Ori of the very late understanding, the expression of a man who has finally seen the full picture of something he thought he understood, and understands now that he was wrong about the scale of what was in front of him. I held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. I did not look away first. I did not smile. I did not change my expression in any direction. I gave him the 2 seconds, and then I turned back to Gerald Farnsworth and said, in exactly the same tone I had been using, "I'm sorry, where were we?" And Gerald said, "The deviation alerts," and I said, "Right," and continued. Gerald Farnsworth signed a letter of intent before lunch. But that was not the moment. The moment came an hour later. The main stage program at the summit runs keynote talks and panels throughout the day. IceVault was scheduled to present at 11:30 a session titled The Future of Cold Chain Optimization in the Southwest, which had been on the program for months and which Desmond and his team had prepared. Materials for that I had not seen but could have written from memory. At 11 o'clock, I walked onto the main stage of the Southwest Regional Cold Chain Summit for the first time in my life, in my own right. As the founder and CEO of Acadia Cold Chain Solutions, I had been asked 2 weeks prior to fill a last-minute panel spot, a session titled Women in Logistics Leadership, Building the Next Generation of Cold Chain Infrastructure. I had said yes immediately and told no one outside of the direct logistics of it. The panel was 4 women, each of us extraordinary in our own way, and when it was my turn to introduce myself, I sat forward slightly in my chair. I put my hands flat on the table in front of me, and I said, "I'm Celeste Aurore Thibodeau. I founded Acadia Cold Chain Solutions 18 months ago. Before that, I spent 7 years in this industry as an unrecognized contributor to operations infrastructure at another company in this space. I designed systems, I built protocols, I developed supplier relationships, and I did all of it without my name on a single document. So I understand cold chain logistics from the absolute inside out. And I am here because I believe the next generation of this industry is going to be built by people who were previously invisible. Let me tell you why." The room held about 400 people. Not full, never full for the 11 o'clock panel, but it was enough. And somewhere in that room, in a row about 2/3 back from the stage, Desmond was sitting. I don't know exactly when he had arrived. I don't know if he walked in and saw me immediately and stayed out of some complicated stubbornness, or if he sat down and then looked up. What I know is that he was there, in that row, very still, while I spoke. I spoke for 45 minutes. I talked about protocol design philosophy, about the specific inefficiencies that operators miss until they've lost a shipment and the loss forces them to see it, about the architect, of real-time thermal mapping and what it takes to build a deviation response system that actually performs under pressure. I talked about the Acadia approach, not maiming IceVault, not making any reference to anything that was not directly about Acadia's work, and Acadia's methodology with the fluency and authority of someone who has been doing this work for the better part of a decade and knows it completely, in the dark, without notes. The moderator, Dr. Felicia Odoms from Texas Southern University, asked me to walk through a specific case study. I did. I used precise numbers, verifiable data, specific operational language that the people in this room spoke as their native tongue. I spoke it back to them without pause, without hedging, without any of the apologetic qualification I had observed in myself during the years when I was in rooms like this as Desmond's wife. I spoke it the way it always deserved to be spoken directly, specifically, without apology. When I finished a detailed answer about scaling, and the second questioner from the audience followed up with a technical query about our temperature protocol, I gave a 2-minute and 30-second answer. And when I finished, there was a beat of silence before the room responded. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of a room that has just heard something land. And then the applause came, real applause, not enthusiastic for politeness applause, but the kind that means, "We understood what you just said, and we know what it's worth." From 2/3 back in the room, Desmond did not applaud. He left before the session ended. I tracked his exit in my peripheral vision while answering the follow-up question. I watched him stand, quietly, and turn, and move toward the back of the room with the careful, controlled movement of a man who is trying to leave without being noticed, and push through the side door. It closed behind him without a sound. I did not change my expression. I finished my answer. The PA, Nell continued. After the session, the convergence was immediate. People who had attended Ice Vault conferences for years without speaking to me, who had interacted with me as the founder's wife, as the woman at the dinner table, as the person handling the logistics of the event, but never the subject of anyone's professional attention, came to speak to me now. Suppliers I had worked with through Ice Vault's channels for years came to find me and said things like, "I had no idea you had your own company, and we've been looking for this exact protocol, and how soon can we get a formal meeting on the calendar?" And I received each of them with warmth and presence and the absolute composure of someone who has done this work for years and finally has her name on it. By the time the floor began to thin toward the evening reception, my team lead Destiny came to find me. She was trying very hard to maintain professional expression and losing the battle. "Celeste," she said. "I know," I said. "Celeste," she said again. "I know. We need a bigger booth next year." And I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and uncomplicated and full for what felt like the first time in a very long time. I attended the evening reception for 90 minutes. I spoke to the right people. I was warm and sharp and present, and then I stepped outside into the San Antonio evening, which was soft and cool in the October way, the river walk beginning to glow in the dusk, the air carrying river smell and grilled food and something floral and indeterminate. I found a bench. I sat down. I took off my heels. I put my feet on the cool pavement. I took out my phone, and I called Simone. Acadia Cold Chain Solutions is now in its 3rd year. 61 employees, 7 states. Annual revenue in the top 15% of South Central region operators. 3 of our 7 senior operations leads are women. Our head of protocol design is 26 years old. I recruited her from her master's program at UT Austin because I saw the architecture of her mind in a conference presentation, and I thought, I am not going to let that disappear into someone else's company without her name on it. We were nominated for the Southwest Logistics Innovation Award last spring. Ice Vault Solutions was also nominated. Acadia won. Destiny called me at 7:30 in the morning before coffee, before anything, and made a sound I will not attempt to transcribe. I sat on the edge of my desk and laughed until my eyes were wet, because here is the thing. I did not build Acadia to destroy Ice Vault. I want to say that plainly, because the neater story is that I did, and I am not here to sell you the neater story. I built Acadia because it was mine to build, because the work had always been mine, because I had always been this capable, this fluent, this worthy of being the face in the room instead of the infrastructure behind the face, and I had allowed a tradition, a man and my own desire to believe in the partnership to keep me in a room with no windows. I am not carrying rage. I want to be clear about that too. I am carrying the knowledge of what I lost those 7 years, that invisibility, the particular loneliness of being the unseen engine of someone else's success, and I hold that knowledge clearly and without apology, because it is real and it matters. But it is not what drives me. What drives me is the work. It always was. Do you know what I mean when I say the work was always the point? That there is something that is yours, a specific fluency, a native language, a way your mind works that is just yours, and the feeling of doing it fully, with your name on it, in the light, with nothing hidden. That feeling is its own justification. It needs nothing else. Have you felt that? I hope you have. I hope you are moving toward it if you haven't yet. Tell me in the comments, what is the thing that is yours? The thing that is your native land. Language? 6 months after the summit, in the spring, when the Texas wildflowers were coming up along the highway medians in that particular golden impossibility, I drove back to Lafayette. Mamie Odette was 84, smaller, softer around the edges. But her eyes were exactly the same, reading everything, revealing nothing she didn't intend to reveal. I brought her a lemon curd tart from the bakery she had always loved, and she pretended not to care and ate most of it. I poured her coffee the way she liked it, and she poured mine the way she had always poured mine, chicory, strong, the way you only get it in Louisiana. I told her about Acadia. She listened carefully, with the focused attention she brought to everything she considered worth her attention. She asked 2 or 3 precise questions. She nodded, and then she was quiet for a long moment, looking out the kitchen window at the yard, at the live oak that had been there since before she was born, its Spanish moss moving slig. HTLY in whatever small wind was coming off the bayou. Celeste, she said, you remember what I used to tell you girls, about the cypress trees, that we bent in the wind but we never broke. She looked at me then, directly, with those reading eyes. I think, she said slowly, I may have told it wrong. She paused. The cypress doesn't bend to survive. It grows roots down into the water, down into the place where nothing else can hold, where the ground is soft and dark and there is no foundation anyone else would choose, and that is why it doesn't fall. Not because it bends, because it roots deeper than anything around it. I stared at her. Mamie, don't make a production of it, she said, and refilled my coffee. I did not make a production of it. I sat with it. I carried it home. Before I left, I went to her sewing box, the same wooden box on the same shelf in the same corner, where it had always been. The hinge slightly loose on the left side, the way it had been for the last 20 years, and I took out the mother-of-pearl thimble. The one that had belonged to her own grandmother, the oldest Thibodeau woman whose name I knew. The one she had always said was the only piece the women in our family had ever owned that was truly, unambiguously theirs. Not given by a husband, not inherited through a marriage. Made for them, paid for by them, used by them, worn smooth in exactly the right places by their own hands. I turned it over in my palm. Small, cool, perfectly made, the nacre catching the afternoon light. Mamie, can I have this? She looked at it, looked at me. I was saving it for Simone, for when she graduates. She graduates in 3 years, I said. Let me hold on to it until then. She made a sound that was not quite yes, and not quite anything else, and I chose to interpret it as yes, and she did not stop me. I carry the thimble in the small interior pocket of my laptop bag. It goes everywhere. Every pitch meeting, every board call, every flight, ever. Rye morning when I sit down at my desk and begin the particular daily work of building the thing that has my name on it, I can reach in and feel it there, cool and smooth and worn in the right places. Something made with their own hands. Something that was always theirs. On the day Simone graduates from Tulane with her degree, with her hunger still intact, with all of her aliveness still fully inside her, I am going to give it to her. And I am going to sit down and tell her this story. Not the clean version, not the short version, the real version, with all the nights in it, and all the cold floors, and all the tea made at 2 a.m, and all the self-doubt that was so loud it was almost a sound. Because that is how it passes from one woman to the next. Not through silence, not through bending toward the shape of someone else's expectation. Through the truth, said clearly and out loud, to the ones who come after us. Through showing them what it actually looks like, not the mythologized version, but the real thing, the one with the fear in it and the long nights and the specific, hard-won competence that comes from doing the work for years, even when no one was watching. Especially when no one was watching. Because you are watching, and that matters. I am Celeste Aurore Thibodeau. I am the founder and CEO of Acadia Cold Chain Solutions. I grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana, in a family that taught me to bend. I bent for a long time. And then I grew roots somewhere no one else was looking, down into the soft, dark ground where the real foundation is, and I built something that has my name on it. Something that cannot be undone. Something that 411 pages made sure of. And I am only getting started. If Celeste's story is sitting in your chest right now, if you heard something in her voice that you recognize, something that sounds a little like your own kitchen floor at 45 minutes of stillness, please don't leave here alone with it. Share this video with the woman in your life who needs it tonight, the friend who is being the invisible engine of someone else's dream. The sister who keeps saying, maybe someday, about the things she should be doing now. The cousin who is so talented it is almost painful to watch her be unseen. Subscribe to her untold revenge. This channel exists for every woman who has done the work in the dark and is ready to understand that the dark was just the place where the roots go. There are more stories coming. Stories about women who stayed quiet and then became undeniable. Stories about the slow builds and the long games and the moments, the quiet, devastating, undeniable moments that changed everything. Your story might be one of them. And when you are ready to tell it, we will be here.